Coming this section, the Shadow Minister who suggested that Labour will look into dropping education guidelines on gender. The current measures include teachers having to point out that there are only two biological sexes, like as if that's controversial. That's the current, only came in this year, this. What's likely to happen? Helen Joyce joins us in a few moments' time. Also later, I don't believe it. TV comedy catchphrases at the risk of dying out. Oh, no, no, no. Yes, they are. Yes, this is because Gen Z are not so cushy and simply don't know some of the greatest comedy lines that this country has ever produced. And I'm grateful to Phil Dave, our producer today, for writing that particular paragraph. It was a work, frankly, of absolute genius. Plus, we'll continue to take your calls on thoughts of who should be the next leader of the Tory party. If the polls are to be believed, it looks like the Tories could be looking for a new chief on July the 5th. More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So, one of Labour's most senior frontbenchers, Bridget Phillipson, has suggested that Labour could ditch guidelines that are currently ban children from being taught that there are more than two genders. The current guidance was announced by the Conservatives earlier this year on what pupils could be taught about sex and gender. And I think really what we want to teach children is the truth, don't we? We just don't want to make stuff up. That should be the line. You know, what do you want to teach? OK, we can argue about what the agenda should look like, but the one thing we should all agree on is don't make stuff up. I think that's reasonable. It states that people can be born as the wrong sex and they can change their identity to the opposite sex. It also says that teachers must point out that there are two biological sexes. Let's discuss this. Journalist and author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, Helen Joyce, back with us on the programme. Helen, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Look, when I heard Bridget Phillipson, in fact, she didn't, to be fair, she didn't say, we're going to rip this up. But she talked about, I think, the word review. And when I hear a politician use the word review, I start to discombobulate a bit because I think I know what it really means.
I mean, imagine how tired those of us who spent years trying to get the previous government to have a look at what children are being told about sex and gender in their sex ed classes or RSHE. How we feel about this. So there's two reviews that were underway when Rishi Sunak called the snap election. And actually, both of them, draft guidance had been published. That was about what children learn in sex ed. And the other one was about how schools handle children who say that they're gender distressed. And they're both out for consultation. One of them, the consultation had just closed. The other one, it was ongoing. And so these are both going to land on the desk of the next Education Secretary, whoever that is. Bridget Phillipson is indeed the Shadow Education Secretary for Labour. And honestly, it's taken us years to get the government and the DfE to understand that there's an issue here. Lots more children are identifying as trans, and lobby groups have been going into schools for years and years now and telling teachers that they must tell children that sex is a spectrum and that people can be born in the wrong body and that your gender identity is more important than your sex. And lots of teachers have been telling children this. This is not a fake problem. We hear about it in our inbox all the time. So I really hope that whoever becomes the next Education Secretary has a look at the work that's been done, because a lot of good work was done. It was quite painful to get to that stage. Yeah. Has a look at the consultation responses. Lots of people will have come back to tell stories from their own children's school, both of children being told to use the wrong facilities, children being transed behind their parents' backs, children being taught nonsense in their sex ed classes. And stops thinking of this as a culture war issue. This is a child safeguarding issue.
Correct.
And as you rightly say, about telling children the truth.
Why has, I mean, obviously the trans lobby, whatever, or trans activists, they say that actually we've always had that amount of trans children among us. It's just that they've had no avenue to explore their gender concerns or their issues. There's been nowhere to discuss this. So what the rules had previously been doing, what these groups that go into schools, I'm literally just putting their argument across here, Helen,
sure.
You'll be familiar with all of this. They say, you know, it's a good thing because actually we haven't increased the amount of trans children, we've just given them a safe environment to be able to talk about it.
I mean, I literally never met anybody when I was a child or a young adult, literally not one ever, who thought that they were born in the wrong body, or no matter how they phrased it or anything like that. And now, as we know from polling that we did at Sex Matters, the human rights charity where I work, most schools have children who say that.
Yeah.
It's just much more plausible that there's an element of social contagion here. If you tell children that what makes you a boy or a girl is how you behave, relevant to stereotypes, relative to the stereotypes for boys and girls, that makes you a boy or a girl, then children who are gender non-conforming will think that they're maybe the opposite sex. And then once you start thinking about this, you can get distressed.
And then, of course, if you throw in a few celebrities as well that have jumped on the bandwagon because it's cool and kind to talk about this. I noticed one of the blooming Spice Girls at the weekend, bellowing off about, here's to the trans kids or whatever it was. And I just think, isn't that funny? Because, not many years ago, somebody might have carted her off in handcuffs for giving out dangerous information. And yet here we are sort of applauding it, and the Islington elite saying, isn't this fantastic?
And then there's also the issue of what is a school to do anyway if a child says they're a member of the opposite sex? Like, what if there are lots of children who would think this spontaneously? I don't think that's true, but suppose. It's still the case that other children have rights too, other children have to be kept safe too, all children have to be kept safe. And you can't pretend about sex in the context of a school and keep children safe. Keeping children safe means knowing what sex everybody is, not letting anyone go into spaces for the opposite sex. Those things exist for a reason. So even if you fall for this idea, in my opinion, this mistaken idea that someone can be born in the wrong body, or that it's, gender identity is more important than sex, you still have to keep children safe. And the biology still continues being what it is. I mean, we don't actually change our biology.
Where do you think, in terms of where this came from, and when you came into the studio with us a little while ago, Helen, I think we might have started to explore this and possibly run out of time, but this is, in 20 years more of doing this job, I can honestly say we never once discussed trans issues. Even when Nadia won Big Brother all those years back, we still didn't discuss we just discussed that Nadia won Big Brother. It was never an issue. It never came up. And what seems like half an hour ago, this sort of explosion, this just cacophony of voices suddenly appeared on the stage to say, no, we've got to recognise this. There's a thing called non-binary, a completely invented term with no biological fact attached to it, suddenly was thrown out as if, we'd been using the term forever. Where did it come from?
I think part of it is that lobby groups that had been doing work on other things actually achieved their goals. In particular, the lobby groups that were looking for gay marriage got that goal in 2013. And rather than doing what they might have done, which is to sort of, scale back, size down, or, for example, start working for people in the very many countries where gay men are still thrown off buildings and hanged and beaten and so on.
True.
Instead, they just moved on to the next thing. So Stonewall moved on in 2015 to what they called trans rights, which means pretending that there aren't two sexes, pretending that people can change sex. I think that's the big one, honestly, is that there were people looking for something to do. But then the other thing is that when there were only very, very tiny number of people who said that they were trans, it didn't really impact on other people. And now there's quite a lot of those people, and we're seeing them in places where they are impacting on other people. So like sports or whatever. So, just one man competing in a women's sporting competition ruins that sporting competition for all women. And so when the fight has been brought to everybody else, people start to think, well, hang on a bit, I thought I was just being kind here, and now you're telling me I have to be okay with some grown man in my teenage daughter's changing room. I'm suddenly not okay with it. So then people start to say, I'm not okay with this. And then we're told it's a culture war, which is very irritating because we didn't start it. Yeah. We're just trying to say, we have rights too. Stop treading on our rights.
It's just that the more, I don't know whether to get angry or just laugh sometimes, Helen. I'm sure you go through this whole spectrum of emotions as well, because, at one level, the terminology, the pronoun thing, that, if you'd have asked somebody literally in, 2010, I want to be called they, but you'd have just been told to get in the bin. You'd have said, what are you told? You can't change our language. What do you mean they? This is a nonsense. And now we have people on TV, even the Daily Mail, for goodness sake, jump in on this one and find themselves changing pronouns to suit this sort of fashionable idea that some people have jumped on. You know, I refuse to be called he or she, so therefore I'm going to be called they, something that just wasn't a thing 20 minutes ago.
I think people want to be kind, they genuinely do, and they want to be polite. And unfortunately, people have got in their heads that if a man doesn't want to be called a man, it's impolite to call him a man. And I mean, I'm not trying to rub anything in anyone's face. I'm pointing out just that sometimes you do have to say what sex somebody is.
Yeah.
Like the reason that a man can't compete in women's sports is because he's a man. And I can't say it's because he's a trans woman or because he's trans. It's not that. It's because he's a man. I can't make the argument without actually stating the facts. I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm doing it to be kind to the people whose sport and competition it actually is. And the same in schools. It's not kind to lie to children. It's not kind to encourage them to dissociate from their bodies. And it's not kind to put them at risk by telling them that they can actually use spaces that are intended for the opposite sex. It's actually dangerous. It's actually very unkind. But people haven't thought it through. They haven't thought their thought all the way through to the end. And they think they're being kind and polite. And they think you're being mean. And then they see, of course, that the people who are mean get called awful things. They get threatened. They get threatened online. They get politicians saying that they're culture warriors, etc., etc. And so then very ordinary, good people think, oh, this is very complicated, I better step back. And it leaves it to the loudest voices, who are these people who are saying mad things like that you can be neither male nor female.
Yes, and it also because it sounds like it's in the, you know, the kind of homophobia, racism department. You know, companies come along and, you know, and they say, I mean, if you look at the sort of critical race industry and how, you know, much money has been made in that, going around to companies going, oh, we can make your staff kinder. We can get rid of their isms and their unconscious biases. And they've probably got loads around, you know, you thought we got rid of it with the whole gay rights issue. No, it's still there, but it's moved into the trans area. You don't want your staff saying the wrong thing and upsetting people. And big companies, multinational companies have gone, yeah, okay, how many millions is that? Here's 10 million quid, make our staff kinder. And it's sort of that, isn't it? You know, people intimidated by the loudest voices, people that you would least think have rolled over and just accepted it, just in case, like an insurance policy almost.
Well, if you call in the witch hunters, they are going to find some witches because they do want some repeat business. So if you get somebody in to examine your company to see whether you've got people who are homophobic, transphobic, anything else phobic, they're going to find some. And honestly, the transphobic is the easiest to find because all you have to say is that there are two sexes and sex can't change, which is true. And you'll get called transphobic. Yeah. I should have said as well, you know, the LGBT thing. So 10 years ago, we didn't say LGBT, we said LGB. Yeah. And then this forced teaming, they call it, this attachment of the T to the LGB. So now people say LGBT rights. And who wants to be against that? Because, you know, you've got friends who are married to someone of the same sex. You don't think that people should be gay bashed or whatever. But suddenly you found that, you know, just by saying that you think it's bad to gay bash, you're suddenly supporting men and women's sports and they, thems and people being able to change sex.
I've no idea why the T is ever included in that. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's a whole different conversation. But as you rightly say, you put the word rights to it, you'll be a kinder person. If you're a nicer person, if you do. I mean, it's just it's anti-intellectual. It's a nonsense. And I don't hold out much hope, I think, Helen, that you know, if it is a Labour government, I think they are perhaps more malleable to kind of rolling over again and accepting some of this newfound language and sort of anti-science, anti-biology guff that's almost plaguing not just our vocabulary but our culture.
But remember, we've had a Tory government for the last 14 years. I mean, you know, I don't know that we can say this is a party political issue.
That's true.
I think people in every party have been captured by this. The lobby groups have really done an amazing job of getting in there. I think they used the great name that people like Stonewall had. And there are still people who think that Stonewall is just all about, you know, don't gay bash. They don't understand what a bizarre ideological agenda it has, and that's people across all of the parties, I'm afraid.
Indeed. Helen, it's always good to have you on. We will speak again. I wish we didn't have to speak again in a way, but we absolutely will. That is Helen Joyce, journalist and author of Trans: When Ideology Meets Reality.